stretched upon even today. The town seems at first sight an ordinary, busy country town.
In the 20th century, Shakespeare's status as national poet has often obscured the true nature of his genius by turning him into a national treasure.
The best Shakespeare is always Shakespeare made contemporary. In the late 20th century, the way to do that is through the cinema. And so it seems to me that one of the great achievements of our time is Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet film, which keeps the authentic text but updates the setting and makes Shakespeare familiar to a whole new generation.
Two households, both alike in dignity, in fair Verona, where we lay our scene. From ancient grudge break to new mutiny, where civil blood makes civil hands unclean. From forth the fatal loins of these two foes, a pair of star-crossed lovers take their life.
What we were doing was absolutely disregarding the accumulation of what I call Club Shakespeare, which kind of dates back to really the Victorian period. We just wanted to get it back to the kind of violent, direct, passionate, musical, free, energetic, bawdy, savage, rambunctious storytelling that it was when this author brought it to the stage.
A modern-day version of a Shakespearean classic is about to hit the big screen.
The timeless classic, Romeo and Juliet. Of course, you remember the story. Star-crossed Gen X lovers in Verona Beach, California.
All these modern-day movies, too violent. Give us the classics like Shakespeare.
Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet.
William Shakespeare.
Shakespeare 90s.
A fresh version of William Shakespeare.
A timeless tale of romantic woe.
An updated version of the classic love story.
Shakespeare were making a movie. What kind of cinematic film would he make? Certainly not a precious one.
Instead of swords, we have guns. Instead of horses, we have cars.
And it really gets the points of what the play was about and makes it clear for audiences today.
The romance worked.
Well, I don't know where to begin with this because, first of all, there's no romance.
In a visually dazzling contemporary retelling of Romeo and Juliet, a version that I think has as much to say about guns as it does about love.
There's no feeling I have that there's anything going on between these two young kids.
It's not about it being Shakespeare or not Shakespeare. It's just an incredibly great story.
We were telling the same story, we're using the same words.
They don't speak the text, they speak a tenth of the text, and they speak it into the wind.
Shakespeare would have wanted his work to sort of live on through the ages.
They didn't do it in Zeffirelli either. They cut it out. Oh, please, Zeffirelli, you're talking about a great moment in my life.
The hip and daring William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet hits theaters this Friday.
Hark the Bard is Boffo over at the box office.
Top-grossing film this weekend, Romeo and Juliet.
Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo? Topping the box office, that's where the modern telling of the tragic love story is a hit with moviegoers.
As the latest film version of Romeo and Juliet stirred new
Love conquered all at the movie box office this weekend.
Turns out the Bard is the baddest bad boy on Hollywood's block.
I love Romeo and Juliet. Hey, you know, when we had to do it in high school, and I thought it was great.
The cars almost collide. Romeo squeals over the side of the road over there in the oncoming traffic. Tybalt is supposed to actually, in fact, roll, crash, 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 and ends up dragging along upside down just here where the palm trees are. I like it chocolate. Yeah. And so what we want to shoot is the big moment between Romeo and Tybalt, through all of this traffic, all of these lights flashing, cars going. It should be, it's, you know, a wet, very inky, dark night. Screaming at him, shoot me, shoot me, shoot me.
Choose your soul! It's but a little way away! Stay for thine to keep him company!
That's marching crazily towards Tybalt, grabs Tybalt's gun like...
Either thou or I, or both must go with him! Either thou or I, or both must go with him!
Cut! Action!
Down to the gun. Don't drop it. Cut.
We have cut. Back number one, everybody.
One more.
And that's when the rain comes. The storm finally breaks from the heat wave. And then we get this. We're relying on getting this kind of shot here, up to an optical with this, and we see Tybalt in the water, Romeo at the base of the stairs.
Romeo! Away, be gone! Stand out of me!
Really good, man.
So I turned up and I met my executive, Peter Rice, and Peter's job, and he's here today. I just took that drink of water so he could sweat just a little bit more. But his job was to shepherd in new creative, types and ideas. So anyway, Peter had assembled the top brass to hear, what this wacky Aussie guy who made Strictly Ballroom had come up with. So there was a lot of focus. So anyway, a few days before the pitch, Peter Rice says to me, okay, Baz, hit me with it. So, I'm sure he's sort of expecting Strictly Ballroom too. So I said, well, Peter, it's a modern-day Romeo and Juliet, the play by William Shakespeare, and it's set in a Miami-like world, right, where the Capulets and the Montagues have guns, and, the girls are in swimsuits, and it's on the beach, and, there are all these, language gags. I had these language gags. So, there'd be the high-security compound of the Capulet mansion, and Romeo would leap over the compound wall, and the lights would go, vroom. He'd go, it's what lights are you on the window breaks? Sort of big laugh, So I thought I was doing really well, because, and anyway, so I stop, and I finished telling the story, and I thought that kind of went well, and I look over to Peter, And he's going, that is a great idea. I mean, he was almost, you know, lights are flashing before his eyes and my life is over, he's thinking, that is a great idea. And all he was thinking was, oh my God, I've got to go in there in 10 minutes. He says, great, Pash, it's a great story. Just, you know, go in there and tell the story. It's a great story, but just one thing. Don't mention the language, right? Tell the story, don't mention the language. Don't mention it's Shakespeare, you know, until the end. Right? And I said, well, what if they ask if it is Shakespeare? And he says, if Tom asks if it's Shakespeare, right, just say, Tom, I respect your question, but I would like to answer that at the end. So, cut to Peter Chernin, Tom Jacobson's office. Everyone's there totally focused on me. I go, it's a modern day Romeo, and as soon as I say the word Juliet, he says, okay, is that Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare with the original language? Tom, I respect your question, but I would like to answer that at the end. And he goes, okay. So I just start to tell the story. So I go, there's this guy, Romeo, and he's got a shirt, a blue Hawaiian shirt on, and the girls are there on the beach, and I could feel this bead of sweat forming on my forehead and dribbling down like that. And I said, and the Capulet mansion has a wall around it, and Romeo, he leaps over the wall, and the lights come on, and he goes, the lights are on. 1.5 hours later, right, I say, and they die. And Tom is feeling like so sorry for me at this point. He leans over and he says, like talking to an accident victim, he says really encouragingly, you know, I hear there's music in it. I go, yes, there's music in it. And Tom goes, what kind of music? And I go, contemporary music. And he goes, what kind of contemporary music? And I go, more hits than you can possibly imagine. And they kind of laughed. It was such a ridiculous thing to say. So we went, yeah, right? So I just thought, oh, look, it doesn't matter, it's a disaster. You know, it doesn't matter. Look, it is Shakespeare, it's William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. And Tom says, so it is a play by William Shakespeare. I go, yes. I said, look, take a punt on the draft and give me a few $1,000s more, and I will make you a video version of the scenes in their modern costumes, and then we'll all sit down, and if the idea doesn't work, I'll be the first one to say, you know, if we start falling out laughing when they get out and start speaking the language, you know, we'll say, it doesn't work, right? And I'll do Strictly Ballroom too. Anyway, they did give me the few $1,000s, which I was able to go to Leonardo before agents, before business, talk to him about the project. He came to Australia flying coach for no money, without any sign of a deal, simply to enjoy exploring the idea, to see not only if we could convince the studio, but firstly, if we could convince ourselves that it could work. Why don't we have a look at it?
And Juliet is the sun. Rise, fair sun, and kill the envious moon, who's already sick and pale with grief that thou, her love, art far more fair than she. Be but not her maid, since she is envious. Her vestal livery is but sick and green, and none but fools do wear it.
Romeo!
The love I bear thee can afford no better term than this. Thou art a villain.
Tybalt, the reason that I have to love thee doth much excuse the appertaining rage in such a greeting. Villain am I none. Therefore, farewell. I see thou knowest me not.
Die! This does not excuse the injuries that thou hast done me! Turn and draw! Draw! Turn and draw! 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 Turn and draw! Draw!
I never injured thee. So good Capulet, whose name I tender as dearly as mine own. Be satisfied.
A plague on both your houses! Either thou or I, or both must go with him. Either thou or I, or both must go with him. Fucking shoot me! Shoot me!
So finally, when it was time to do another film, I had to examine my soul and say, what is the next thing I really need to make? That's where I start. What do I need to make before I pass it on to my team? I mean, what that really means is that you've got to get up at 5 o'clock every morning for 2 years. You have to have a hell of a lot of passion about something. So it has to scare you enough to really get you going. So out of a long list of creative ideas, I finally wanted to address this notion of Shakespeare in film. Shakespeare actually shares something deeply in common with all of us in this room. Now, in a city of 400,000 people, that's London, he had to get an audience of 4,000, mostly drunk, yelling, screaming ticket buyers into the theatre every day. So Shakespeare firstly had to tell his story in such an aggressive, sexy, noisy, rambunctious way that he could shut them up and at the same time reach out and touch every kind of person from every kind of background. And you know, I truly wanted to learn from this guy that lived 400 years ago. And I instinctively felt that a funky Shakespeare would and could work. So my team and I did like a year of research discovering that most of Shakespeare on film came from what you call kind of 19th century version, you know? And that is lots of round vowels and tights, you know, but soft when nights when on the window breaks, you know? Well, you see, we wanted to do a sort of an Elizabethan interpretation of Shakespeare. You know, one of the great things about them is that they would use any device possible, from the lowest bawdy comedy, you know, like Something About Mary, to the highest of tragedies, you know, a la Titanic. And it'd all be in the one show. So if Shakespeare was writing a screenplay, it'd be like, you know, Something About Mary set on the Titanic, that kind of thing. He did not differentiate, right? He would have low comedy, high drama, violence, action, popular song, you know, pop song, hey diddy diddy. Virtually all of it, all wrapped up in the one show. So there was no thematic style. It was just anything that grabbed them, no matter who they were, and manipulated them, no matter who they were. And, you know, we wanted to convert that into a cinematic style, because we want to be dealing with a cinema language that is not going to be working this year or even next year, but is actually about getting through that, what I call the gate of the millennium. Rain.
Call me with love and I'll be baptized. Henceforth I shall never be Romeo.
What man I found that this was screened in night to some bliss on my console?
My name, I don't know how to tell you.
Swimming?
My name, you're saying, is equal. Myself is citizen, man, we can leave. But I didn't know the other word.
Bark, 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 bark.
Oh, shit.
Bark, bark. What's going on down here? Bring your hand around D. Camera more. Yeah, now break away, Claire. Quickly, yeah.
But wait, I'm not pulling myself out. I would love to do this here on the camera. That's what I keep in our house. You see, remember me. But I love you with them for me. Wanting of thy love.
Sexy kiss. And that's a wrap. Thank you very, very much. And the crew can come back and finish the set. The actual light thing. I'm going to try and put Leonardo and Claire into that light thing. Act! And print that one. Is that all we're doing?
I never will be more. Sorry, Bass, sorry. Okay, we'll go straight away.
Romeo, doff thy name, and for thy name, which is no part of thee, take all myself.
I take thee at thy word.
Give me a whole lot of improvised scat over it too, you know? Do you know what I'm saying there? action. So D, you're clear on, aren't you? You cross the camera like this and Claire moves away. So start right up against the glass, chaps. Take 2 steps back. And holding hair and action. One more, and...
Still rolling, go back.
And straight in, go, action. Cut, let's get him out quickly, thank you. Ladders, warm clothes, blah, blah, blah.
Thank you. I think that's
very good.
You know not what you do! Put up your swords!
Okay, watching. Ready? Watch your camera. And... action.
Poor fools, you know not what you do! Put up your swords!
Now, looks, tension, and...
I am a pretty piece of flesh. I am a pretty piece of flesh. Me, they shall feel while I'm able to stand. Yo, I am a pretty piece of flesh. You know, the quarrel is between our masters.
The quarrel is between our masters.
And us, their men!
And the girl's car drives away now, and back.
Oh, let's take the law of our sides. Let them begin. I will bite my thumb at them, which is disgrace to them if they do.
Do you bite your thumb at us, sir?
I do bite my thumb, sir. Do you bite your thumb at us, sir?
Do you bite your thumb at us, sir?
Is the law of our side if I say aye? No. No, sir. I do not bite my thumb at you, sir. But I bite my thumb, sir.
You lie! Talk to me, man! Poor fools, you know not what you do!
Wert thou drawn among these heartless hinds? Turn deep in volume. Look upon thy death.
I do but keep the peace. Put up thy sword, or manage to part these men with me.
Peace? Peace? I hate the word. I hate peace like I hate hell, Montagues, and pow.
And is he a man to encounter Tybalt?
Why, what is Tybalt?
More than Prince of Cats. He is the courageous captain of compliments. He fights, as you sing, prick song. Keeps time, distance, and proportion. He rests, his minimum rest. 1, 2, and the third in your bosom. The very butcher of a silk button.
I hear a pop over there, so I reach for here. Spin.
Yep.
Fire, knock the gun out of the little kid's hands. I hear something back there, I gotta go back.
The spin.
Spin, put this back here.
Mm-hmm.
out in volume. Cars coming.
Slow motion. Goes down, go down. Boom. And gun. Okay. Keep it there. Boom. In slow motion, go quickly. Pop, bang. Pop. Down, go Abra. Mickey. Up forward. Cut. Go Samson. Starts the car and it's into the roll.
So I throw myself down. Come up. Put it back in.
As the car is leaving, Gregory is pound. Boom! The gas pipe brakes on the exit. Benvolio. So you start to see the gas and oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, which backs you into there, right? You're low. This is the car exits. Sight moment. Action! And gun return!
My knees.
And jacket!
Take out the other gun, put the sights on.
And the Zen shot. Boom! Gregory Young. Car follows out. Now, Benvolio, you're in the gasoline, right? We're taking gasoline, right? Cut to Tibble. Cigarette. And then you go for your gun, right? And you roll. Action! Now stop here. Stay. Go run over the cars. Go, right, climb over the cars. Climb over them. Climb over the cars. Oh my God. But we just see a little drop of flame go whoosh, and the gas station just blows to busy music. And we're above it. We're on top of it. And the flame fills the screen, whoosh, just with fire. Now out of the fire, we pan up. And now we're really in Mexico City, where we've mounted in really the Jesus statue and we helicopter. So the helicopter shot is only ever in Mexico City. There's a chopper up there now.
Okay.
The gun's back at you, right, like this, down there. You can see it,
Yeah.
He looks up again.
All right. And yeah.
From those bloody hands! Throw your midshipman weapons to the ground!
Drops the gun. The gun's falling. Boom. Cut to Peter Chernin, Tom Jacobson's office. Everyone's there, totally focused on me. I go, it's a modern day Romeo, and as soon as I say the word Juliet, he says, okay, is that Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare with the original language? Tom is feeling like so sorry for me at this point. He leans over and he says, like talking to an accident victim, he says really encouragingly, you know, I hear there's music in it. I go, yes, there's music in it. And Tom goes, what kind of music? And I go, contemporary music. And he goes, what kind of contemporary music? And I go, more hits than you can possibly imagine. And they kind of laughed. It was such a ridiculous thing to say. So we went, yeah.
We used to have these things called green light meetings, where everybody who was responsible for making and marketing a movie, or all of our movies, would sit around in the big conference room in the executive building and sort of, we'd throw out a movie. And the people who were its advocates, usually the development team, the movie development people, would say, this is a movie we want to make and this is why. And they'd almost pitched the idea to the marketing people, the publicity people, the music people, the senior executives, and we as a company would sort of decide, are we going to make this movie or not?
The irony of that greenlight meeting wasn't really clear to me until I saw the film.
But by far and away, it was the most interesting, contentious, energized greenlight meeting we ever had.
I realized how absolutely ineffective words were to describe what Baz had in mind.
Some people saying, this is the greatest thing we've ever seen, oh my God, this is amazing, we have to make this for only $9.5 million.
So when it was put out in front of us, well, it's Shakespeare and it will be contemporary and it will be with some contemporary costumes.
And other people saying, $9.5 million, are you crazy? We can't make a movie where people speak in Shakespearean. And it was just a great, and at the end of it, really by not much of a margin, we as a company agreed to greenlight the movie.
This was my first film with a major studio, and it was a fiscal risk. It was considered crazy, wild, it should never get made. And maybe one way, that we could, kind of shore up our situation is if we had a hit album.
I do look back and I wonder how we made it happen and how we survived it.
If I actually knew what I was doing, I probably would have quit.
The plan is that there is no plan, and we did stick very rigidly to that.
If the music people on Romeo and Juliet knew what they were doing, they probably would have fired me.
I don't think Capitol really knew what they had. They really didn't.
Capitol was not excited about putting that much money down.
It's as if we really hijacked the infrastructure and hijacked the mechanism of the studio on behalf of this little $10 million movie.
Right from the very beginning, the premise was very simple. Shakespeare is here today, he's making a film, he's telling through cinema. He's telling story through cinema. What would he do? Now, when it came to music, one thing was absolutely crystally clear. Shakespeare, along with a very musical language, which was not unlike rap, that is, it had rhythm, and it was driven by a rhythm that united the audience so they could follow the poetry through rhythm. He surrounded that by popular song from the streets, pop music. As well as that, he would take church music. As well as that, he would take folk music. He would take the music that came from the lives of the audience and use it to help tell the story. That was our mission. We had to take the music from the lives of our audience and find a way of it sitting comfortably with the language of William Shakespeare.
Maybe I'm just too demanding. Maybe I'm just like my father too, but maybe I'm just like my mother.
The world was made up of collage. It was visual collage, written collage, sonic collage, and of course in the end, a musical collage. Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet was set in Verona. He'd never been there. And it was a world for him that was visceral and hot and sexy, and religion and politics all mixed up with each other. So he essentially created that world. It didn't take a lot of searching before we realized that the contemporary version of Shakespeare's Verona was contemporary Miami. It was everything we wanted Verona to be. place is quite violent. The place is quite religious. The place is very sexy. A piece of music that was hugely influential on me at the time, that really seemed to sum up this hyper-Miami-like world, was a song called Unfinished Sympathy by Massive Attack. And it was to that track that I began to write. I can remember the opening treatment of Romeo and Juliet. There was also this other album I was relentlessly listening to by Bjork, and the song was Venus as a Boy. We cut our early trailers to that song, and you could really, literally believe that Juliet was singing to Romeo, that song. What I came to discover was that these two pieces of music were connected by something. And that connection was a producer called Nellie Hooper. Nellie won't appear in this documentary because he's not the kind of person who does interviews. But he is present in the film and in the documentary through the music.
Baz was very much in love with the people that were making that kind of music and Bjork. And so he kind of looked around and said, okay, I want the people that are doing this kind of stuff making the soundtrack for my film.
I know that Baz liked a lot of the work that Nelly had been producing, like Massive Attack and Madonna.
Craig, in that respect, was someone who had done a lot of orchestration. He did a lot of pop orchestration in England. He was the go-to guy for, you know, strings. If Madonna wanted strings on her album, you would hire Craig.
And within Nelly's team, there was Marius and I.
Marius is a guy who was known as probably one of the best programmers in England at the time, or excuse me, in Europe at the time. And I didn't really know of him, but if you were like into dance music and the techno stuff, you would have heard his name, at least spoken about, you know, in reverential circles. Oh, you worked with Marius de Vries.
It just sounded like an unlikely proposition that Nelly would be approached to do a Shakespeare film. It felt like a category error.
It was a brave and unusual thing for Baz to choose a production sort of team, I suppose, rather than a composer. I mean, I can't think of anybody who's really done that. But that's a very Baz thing to do, isn't it? He's always sort of ahead of the game, isn't he?
I know that the studio weren't terribly happy about this. They'd kind of said, well, look, can't you just have an ordinary film composer that does film composing and we know, we trust, and it'll all be good?
Follow me close.
This idea of Nelly, Marius, and Craig was presented, and I remember thinking, once again, this sounds really interesting and adventurous.
If you wanted the Massive Attack sound, you know, you wanted the soul-to-soul vibe, these are the people you would hire.
I don't think that the studio really knew what he was making. I don't think they actually really grasped his vision.
And Baz turned up, you know, clutching big photographs and little bits of video and a script. There was a certain amount of bewilderment and skepticism as an initial response to Baz's appearance.
He said, you know, I've been asked to do this film, and he described meeting Baz as, you know, I suppose like when MD meets Baz, you know, they always fall in love with him, don't they?
So that seemed to me to be the perfect way to start a relationship, and in a sense encapsulated everything that was to follow, because there was this sort of rigorous cultural application of, you know, a phenomenal emotional intelligence to the story, coupled with a night out with some drag queens.
I wanted these guys to do it, but the question was, you know, how would we do it? What would the creative process be?
Because normally with a score, what happens is you have a composer who writes to picture, and he has a team of people around him who are used to orchestrating and laying out the whole stall of musical instrumentation, and the director looks at it and says, yeah, that's great, can you change this, can you change that?
The way that Baz encouraged us to approach the music of the film was, I think, unprecedented in terms of how we were able to liberate ourselves from a conventional orchestrated score and achieve the same ends using devices that I think hadn't been used before in cinema.
One thing that made me very happy is that Jeff Foster was hired, and he was a well-known film music guy. And, you know, in my mind, he was going to save our butts.
Marius and Craig and Nelly were very much from the pop sensibility. It's like, you know, you make a record, and if it takes you 2 weeks more to get an idea together, fine. Unfortunately, in film, you don't have another 2 weeks.
If we'd been a bit more experienced and a bit wiser, we might have thrown our hands up and said, this is going to be impossible.
What thou drawn among these heartless hinds?
As each version of the script came out, Baz would ask me to prepare another timeline to go up on the wall in the writing room. And the timeline would have all the scenes from the script along the top, and we would put all the music uses along the bottom of the timeline. So you would know if there was a song playing, or whether it was score, or whether it was a set piece, which is singing and dancing on screen. All of those things were known as early as the writing stage. It's just you don't know at that point what the songs are or what the score will sound like.
Baz always used to say that he knew that the first 15 minutes of the film was crucial, in that at the end of that 15 minutes you were either on board or you were overboard.
Pretty quickly we came up with the idea of it being in operatic form. Now, in an opera, you start with an overture, and in that overture you introduce a little taste of every musical theme you're going to experience throughout the rest of the story.
There were no boundaries in terms of the extent of the eclecticism that we're allowing to take place. So, you know, it's click, click, static, and then the mother of all sort of tape speed-up noises. And a big kind of pagan oratorio, you know, and the influences for which are blatant. With, by the way, the lyrics being a Latin translation of the prologue. Then, as you say, the gas station scene, a little bit of Nine Inch Nails style rock and roll, some Beastie Boys rap.
The boys, the boys!
Most of the fight scenes and confrontations in the movie are shot in a sort of manner that's deliberately reminiscent of Leone, so then obviously you have your Morricone moment. And then you're back to your big oratorio thing.
Throw your mischief and weapons to the ground!
Yeah, as an audience, you're bullied in some sense by this, but you're also persuaded into recognizing that this is the language that the movie is going to speak, both visually in terms of the machine gun editing and the sort of the titles flashing on and off, and musically in terms of all that implausible amount of action sort of sandwiched into 15 minutes. And then you see Romeo. And you have your first moment of stillness after 15 minutes of crazy intense action. And the upshot of that is that you are very, very drawn emotionally to Romeo. You know, it's in the performance, it's in the language there, but it's also to do with the fact that you've been like tossed around by this storm, and suddenly, you know, there's a ray of sunlight, which is a still emotional moment coming through the clouds.
Why then, O brawling love, O loving hate, O anything of nothing first create?
And you're right there with Romeo, and you really begin to engage with the emotional heart of the story at that point. It's not just a wind serenade, it's the opening notes of a Radiohead song, and even Tom's voice, you know, very, very background and mix, but Tom's voice just sort of helping to set the temperature as Romeo. I never questioned whether that first 15 minutes would be watchable, but I think it's a sort of necessary ordeal for the audience that the film should start that way.
At the time that Romeo and Juliet was produced in the mid-90s, it was the beginning of a golden age in soundtracks.
As costs of films escalated, studios were looking for ways to lessen their exposure, looking for ways to get somebody else, you know, to pay for some of their movie.
The way we would do it is we'd go to a label that we felt had the appropriate roster of artists, and they had a feeling for the film, or possibly a big single tie-in with a major artist.
You could probably get a record company to pay this much, this much, this much, would depend on the movie, and that would, you know, offset some of the costs of making your film.
In the case of Romeo and Juliet, Capitol Records won the bidding.
Capitol was not excited about putting that much money down on a record where teenagers were going to be speaking Shakespearean.
Do you buy your thumb at us, sir? I do buy my thumb, sir! Do you buy your thumb at us? Sir.
It was a risk.
The way you market an album traditionally is you release singles, you release videos, you do all of that. Well, in order for them to do that successfully, they need cooperation from the director.
Shakespeare had this hugely eclectic use of music. He used absolute music of the moment from the street. He totally used, you know, dramatic music, church music. And we needed to use contemporary street music. We needed to bring our music from the streets and put it into the film, and yet it had to go into full orchestral score, big love ballads, opera, you know, great for storytelling, terrible for soundtrack.
What I was really looking for in soundtracks and in soundtrack albums were souvenirs of the movies. Like at that time too, in the 90s, was the big inspired by thing, where you didn't have to have music in the movie, you just had to have the name of the movie. And there'd be 12 songs by the hottest artist with the movie name on the record, and I just couldn't stand that.
I mean, Karen had great strength. I mean, she really had balls. And she was always about, let's not go chasing hit album. Let's just tell the story.
Karen was from the record company. She should have been saying, you know, put a hit single in the movie. But in fact, she was more about storytelling, and that was useful to us. It let us get on with the job of using music for that purpose.
Oh, then I see Queen Mab has been with you.
I mean, Queen Mab in the play is notoriously difficult because it's essentially this dialogue between two boys about, oh, you know, love has been with you, but it's kind of very sexual. It's about, you know, Mercutio is saying to Romeo, but it doesn't mean anything. It's only chemical, you know. It's an illusion. It's kind of not real. Don't get drawn down the road by it. So we hit upon the idea that if it's chemical, it's illusionary. And then it was like, you know, a love drug.
The whole Young Heart sequence, it's a long stretch where really we're just relying on one piece of music, which was something of a luxury in the context of a film which jumps around so much. And that gave us the opportunity to take this one piece and serve it up in a number of different ways. Like a very long remix with no constraints in terms of the coherence of the mix itself, which you wouldn't be able to do as a record. So that was a lot of fun.
We were shooting the film in Mexico City, and our music team were in London. So it sort of led to lots of late nights huddled around a speakerphone, reviewing the track. In those days, we didn't have email or MP3s or the internet to help us out with this. It was very basic. It was Baz with a recorder in his hand, which we would then hand over to the choreographer the next morning with the latest version of the song.
We all sort of understood the language we were speaking and what we were aiming at. And so sometimes being that separated geographically wasn't as much of a problem as it might have otherwise been.
Oh, that's great.
Listen, I think it sounds fantastic. I mean, the good thing about it is that it's really got that, you know, that thing about that early disco feel is that it's tragic, but it's really joyous. Yeah.
I don't think it was ever the case that we would be presenting something and Baz would think, oh, they've just gone off in completely the wrong direction. You know, we would often present something and he would say, that's not good enough, do it again, but that's a different thing.
Young Arts Run Free, it goes through its journey from being, you know, hands in the air, handbag, disco, and then when he takes the mythical love drugs, it goes into being a kind of rave track, and then there's a mad moment with Fulgencia Capulet that's kind of, you know, we're at a sort of gangster's Cuban party. And then it becomes all too much and it's wild and it's crazy, and then Romeo. He's got his face in a bowl and he obviously hasn't been well. Pulls the mask off. And he collects himself. In a way, you feel like he's rejected that chemical love. That chemical love has come out of his body. And in that moment, as he begins to breathe more peacefully, we hear the first few notes of the love theme. Because he starts to feel the presence of Juliet through the fish tank. And there begins, in operatic terms, the song the two lovers must share together.
We got a lot of songs and they just didn't hit it. And I had been on the back kind of talking to Desiree, because she was an artist that at the time was hugely popular. We got 2 songs from her, Kissing You and Swords of Love.
There were 2 songs submitted, and deciding on it was mind-numbing in a sense. I mean, Jill Bilcock and I just put it up against sequence after sequence.
That Kissing You ended up just being better for the movie, being the right song, and it was just magic.
Then Craig Armstrong began using it thematically, and you know, I mean, I really thought his orchestrations were just sublime. We talk about operatic form, and you know, you have the overture in the beginning where you get a taste of everything that is to come. But then you've got to set the themes. So we start with the boy theme. And then you have the girl theme. And you bring them together and you must set a new theme, and that is the love theme. Once you've set those themes, you entwine them to continue to tell the story. And there does come a point, once the relationship between the two lovers has reached its full peak, that you can no longer introduce new music.
The music for the swimming pool, which starts off with the Kissing You arrangement and then goes off on its own, you know, musically. It was a big, big string orchestra. I think it was about 60 people. Just whatever happened that day and the way Jeff recorded it, it's one of the best string recordings I've ever heard. I mean, it's like 60 people playing as quietly as they can. It's a very beautiful sound, I think.
We were shooting in Mexico City and the phone rings. Baz was shooting the pool scene and he was, you know, waist deep in water and, you know, directing the actors. And it was a young man called Quindon Tarver on the phone, and he had been preparing an audition of When Doves Cry and Everybody's Free. And he actually did his audition over the phone to Baz.
Everybody's free.
What comes with these enormous investments of often $1 million, dollars or more, some of these huge soundtrack deals in that period, is that the label would have the opportunity to have a big single.
For the kind of money that Capitol was paying for the soundtrack album for Romeo and Juliet, we were supposed to take big chunks of that money and give it to platinum artists who would give us single rights.
I mean, obviously there was a lot of pressure to have big names sing tracks like Everybody's Free or Dove's Cry. I mean, in the script, Craig Pearce and I actually wrote that Dove's Cry should be sung by a young Stevie Wonder.
Maybe I'm just too demanding.
I was scared when I heard about When Doves Cry. And then when I heard it, I was really embarrassed that I was so scared because it was so amazing.
In fact, we did find a young Stevie Wonder. The only thing was he sang a bit more like Aretha Franklin. One of the great joys in working in music with a composer like Craig is that right up to the last moment you're still seeking what is that perfect musical solution. And it was very typical of Craig Armstrong. Right up to the last moment he suddenly went like, just a second, Buzz, I've got a little something here. And out comes a DAT. And on it was this 13-minute orchestral piece he had composed. And it was absolutely perfect for that entire segment of the film. And of course I realized in that moment what a truly remarkable composer in his own right that Craig Armstrong was.
I don't know why I played it to Baz. Probably in desperation, to be honest. Do you know what I mean? Well, you know, but Baz is, you know, wants to hear every combination of you know, the more the better, I think, with Baz. And so probably out of desperation, I was just pulling stuff out of my bag, saying, "What do you think of that?" You know.
Here was this like 13-minute piece of music that was like this really slow adagio that had this slow burn. It's all like minor key. It just starts building and building and building and building, gets to the point. I'm like, oh yeah, this could be useful, sure. So I loaded it into the computer and I started cutting it. And it turns out it just laid in beautifully.
He really liked it, and that's the one that got used through the piece, and lots of sort of variations of it. And I remember Baz saying that he thought it summed up the sort of relationship between Romeo and Juliet, you know. In a funny sort of way, it slowed the film down, I think. Usually that's a bad thing, but it seemed to just let the film breathe a wee bit more, you know, because it was a different kind of reality of music. Do you know what I mean? It was a piece that was written years ago. I mean, I don't know, probably written it like 5 years before.
To have a piece of temp score show up and become the thing itself is highly unusual.
My only love sprung from my only hate.
The one easy thing about writing film music is that a lot of it is on the screen. You know, I mean, I find these days when I divide myself between like more classical commissions and film, film is easier because the vision of a film is really the director's, you know, it's his baby. And a lot of what to do is there, really. You know, you've almost just got to become one of the actors. I'd been working for weeks doing all these dots, right? And I did this tiny little piano thing to this scene. And Baz came in and went, you know, Craig, that's my favourite thing you've done for this movie. And I looked at him, you know, I was really hurt, you know. I like 10 notes on the piano is the best thing I've done in this movie, you know. And I went, you know, I love it. And he did love it. But just, you can imagine the day before, like scoring up O Verona. Do you know what I mean? And this is, I just love it, it's just perfect. You know, it's like, you bastard, thanks, cheers mate, you know. I was like dying at night, you know, trying to get this thing together, and I just tinkled out a few notes, and he went, it's the best thing you did.
music was this huge component in the film. And we had invested a lot financially in the idea of a team of Nellie, Marius, Craig, and the process was expensive. But as we went on, of course, the musical ideas expand and the needs expand, and unfortunately the budget doesn't.
Not only was it a big advance and an expensive project to get into, it got more and more expensive.
The joke around the lot was that we were all the cult of Baz. And the cult of Baz included some of us in the music department, and particularly myself and Laura Ziffrin, who was the person who we worked on this together. And then there was the people in the post-production department, all the people who sort of, after the film had been shot, were now the people managing the spending of money. And we were, you know, now there's nothing anybody can do to me anymore. So I will say that we were hiding money all over the place just because we believed in the execution of Baz's vision.
Holy St. Francis.
You know, Laura had this great thing, a zeitgeisty thing for popular tracks, and she was always saying to me, you know, Baz, you gotta hear this band called, you know, Garbage. And I was like, Garbage, is that a good name?
We found the song, and I know Baz always loved the song, but we weren't sure where it would go. And Nellie just loved it and really believed that they would be a big artist.
From the moment I heard Number One Crush, I just went, this is perfect. But the problem with it was a perfect piece of music that commented on the film. But as with the example of it being operatic form, where it needed, the comment that it made was too late in the film. There was no way of introducing it as a major early theme. And this is where Marius and Craig and Nellie really came to their fore, because they didn't even blink with the idea of, you know, getting the masters and stripping it down. And in the end, we sort of subconsciously layered the song into the film so that it was almost like a ghosted whisper. You know, I could die for you.
I would die for you. I would die, which was, you know, so apposite that that lead vocal on its own became something that we fed through a sequence of reverbs and made it very ghostly. And every now and then you'll hear that just sort of tickling around the edges of the soundtrack. For example, when Juliet goes to confession, if you listen carefully, there's that Garbage track just there in the background.
I do spy a kind of hope which craves as desperate an execution as that is desperate which we would prevent.
We assumed, everybody, that the Garbage track, Number One Crush, was going to be the first single. It smelled like a hit, tasted like a hit. They were right at the exact right place in their career to have a hit from a movie like this. Aesthetically, the record feels like this movie. If you sort of laid them side by side, they feel like they go together. It was the perfect, it would have been the perfect single.
Phil Costello, who was head of radio promotion at the time, was very smart in servicing that record. Because what he did when he serviced that record to radio was, instead of picking out a single, which of course we didn't have the single rights to anything, we did not have single rights to that Garbage song.
Which was a horrible blow, we all thought.
He serviced the whole record. And Garbage was the first song on the record.
It exploded. Radio responded. It was on track to actually be the biggest record in Garbage's career.
It wasn't just successful, it was a smash.
Capitol, was sort of taking the position that they were just getting out of the way, that they weren't doing anything affirmatively or aggressively. They were really just, the record was happening on its own, organically.
I don't think Capitol really knew what they had. They really didn't. And they, especially when Garbage caught on, I think they were absolutely swept off their feet.
Come, gentle night, Come, loving, black, proud night, give me my Romeo.
Filmmaking is all about escalating levels of pain. The shoot is physically very demanding, and then post-production is psychologically very demanding. But it kind of hits this crisis point, which is the studio announces a release date. And once you've got a release date, everything has to lock into place, everything has to be finished, everything has to be committed to. So all the things that you've experimented with or tried out along the way, they're either in the film or they're out.
You write the music, you record it, and then you mix it. And you put it in sort of an easy digestible package.
We were really up against it. We were moving towards the final mix. And we flew, Anton Monstead and I flew to London, and we had but a few weeks to come back with every single final note that was going to be in that movie.
My memories of the mixing, I have to say, are a little bit blurred, born almost entirely of sleep deprivation.
The London mix was very intense. We were not just mixing the music, we were recording it, playing it in live to picture. Things were evolving in the music right up to the very last minute, which is quite unusual.
It was dark, no windows, and for 22 hours a day, there was stuff happening, and there was a constant supply of sort of bit part, you know, guitarist coming in to do stuff.
You know, you had Baz and Nelly and me and, you know, the rest of the team and Maz and Craig and sort of sitting around watching film and building cues live to picture, which is something that I had never seen before or since. It was uniquely the way that this team worked together.
When you think about the way that we made it, it seems kind of odd that the whole thing would be has this feeling of unity that it does, because it seems like it was a hodgepodge of a bit of this and a bit of that. But actually, because we kind of kept coming back to what we'd done and layering new elements, and it was like we'd get an element of something and Baz would go, well, I love what that did in that scene there. Can we have that same wailing guitar noise somewhere else?
I remember being in a cab with Marius, and he's like, if you told me that, you know, in 3 weeks that I was going to be releasing a double album, I would just laugh at you. That there was just no possible way. And yet, that's what we're doing.
There was too much to do. I mean, there's always too much to do, but on this particular occasion, because of the way we were creating it, there was a lot more to do than there would normally be.
It got very intense. You know, there was one period where Jeff and I were up for 2.5 days without any sleep, just trying to feed cues into the dub at the very last possible stage.
And certainly towards the end, I don't think anybody left the studio for the last 3 days. It was just, we stayed.
Really to watch those guys do this together, score a movie sort of before your eyes, was very cool.
In operatic structure, we've talked about the idea you have overture, and then you set up your musical themes, boy, girl, love, tragedy, you know, comedy, so on and so forth. At a certain point, no more new music. So now, as the story, in parallel to the story's tragic evolution, you start to take all those themes, mix them all up, manipulate them, clash them, deconstruct them, so that they reflect the volition towards the final tragedy at the end. And so you see Romeo desperately trying to get back to Juliet, and when he gets inside that bolted church door, bang!
And that's that same fulcrum point as when you first meet Romeo. All of the complexity and the polyphony is just sucked out of the thing. But the same thing is happening with the story, you know? This is the moment where the artifice and all of the heightened theatrical devices, which are so important to the body of the film, are stripped away. They don't belong anymore in what's happening. What it is you're reduced to the simple story. There's a boy, the girl, and death.
And now, we do introduce a new piece of music. It's a very Gorecki-like choral church music. And it shows Romeo making his way ever so slowly down the aisle of the church towards Juliet, who's on the altar. Concluding the story, once both the lovers are dead, that was a very big journey, a very big decision. But Romeo and Juliet takes us back to early myths like Pyramus and Thisbe, and most particularly Tristan and Isolde. And so it seemed a very appropriate way to end their story by taking a piece of Wagner, Tristan and Isolde, and end their story by ascending into the heavens.
Actually, part of the clue of the film is how the film ends with the Tristan and Isolde. I mean, I think that's sort of Baz's subtle wink to the people who want to study the music in the movie, is like, really, this is Wagner. And we're coming out of that tradition, which is so over the top, passionate and crazy.
How, after all that music, do you conclude the piece? And Craig Armstrong, he wrote this beautiful, romantic piece of music, but what we really needed was a poem. What we really needed was a melancholic poem. And we approached Tom York of Radiohead to write something. And, you know, I chased him all around the world. I used to ring him up, I was on tour, and, you know, he'd be in the middle of something. But it really seemed like we would never get this track. And we were literally in the last minutes of the mix. And this dad arrives, said, "From Tom to Baz, hope you liked it." We pop it in, and out pours this melancholic piece of poetry.
Wake from your sleep.
It was immediately apparent that this was an absolute masterpiece, and we were very, very lucky to be offered it.
Today we escape.
What I took away from that film more than anything else was this idea that you can't let go. You have to push it one notch further, because when you do, you get something special. And he certainly, you know, got something special out of us. And I think, you know, we've all gained from it.
I have to thank the music team, which is Nellie Hooper, Marius DeVries, Craig Armstrong.
The soundtrack did do well, and the film was, I think, you know, the masterpiece that people recognise it for now.
These songs are used in incredibly emotional moments and in emotional ways in the film, so that when you play the record, you think, I remember that feeling, not even that scene, just the feeling. So the soundtrack just glowed in a way. I can't even explain it. It's one of those soundtracks that just, it sort of throbbed with its own life.
You almost want to say, I wonder if someone can make a movie like that now. And of course, you can, because Baz did Moulin Rouge, which was, you know, Romeo and Juliet times 10. But very, very few people are actually taking those sorts of chances.
Through the fact that Shakespeare just focused on telling story, and he used whatever he could to convey that story. And when it came to music, he used whatever music he could, and he wasn't judgmental about it. It forced me to let go of my judgment. It forced me to be open to every kind of musical form. And for me, I guess that's the power of Shakespeare. It's the way he manages not only to bring all forms of music together and all forms of theatre together, he manages to bring all kinds of humanity together.
The way that this movie was scored, and I think it's because Nelly and Craig and Maz all came from a record-making background, is they actually recorded parts separately. They recorded, we did a lot of recording in a church which had been converted into a recording studio. We recorded, you know, in strings in this room, and then we recorded brass separately. We recorded all these disparate elements, which is the way you would do a record sometimes, so you have all the control of that as you manipulate it, as you put it together, but not typically the way you'd record a score.
When you're mixing the music, you know, you have like 50 or 60 different tracks. You have, you know, 12 different tracks of different drum sounds that you got to mix together and put into a particular space, and you have all your guitars and all your vocals and all your crazy stuff, and it's a total process. So Jeff Foster was the guy who do it. But Nelly had decided that we were not going to do this in a film studio.
We spent weeks in a dirty, dingy little mixing and editorial studio.
I remember like downstairs, it was just like, like the lobby of the building was like some crazy storage place. I mean, you just walk in there and there's just boxes everywhere. It just like didn't really look like this place where you should be making music. You go up an elevator and there's just like, you know, hip little lounge with like candles and...
It was dark, no windows, and for 22 hours a day, there was stuff happening.
I was set up in the tracking room. I remember there was a guitar closet next door, and so we were doing guitar overdubs for pieces in the film. Like, especially I remember specifically one day, there was a whole session on the gas station scene. And, you know, I couldn't work in there because, you know, 10 feet away from me, there's an amp turned up to 11 and, you know, screeching, and I'm just like, okay.
Vivid recollections of sitting in that room, you know, with Marius at a keyboard, and there'd be Nelly on whole, you know, trying to find a sound, trying to find, you know, playing things with the picture up there, you know, trying to layer that in and realizing we have everything, we don't have everything, what do we need, how are we going to, you know, build this sort of from the ground up. It's one of the reasons why it took such a long time.
There were various record deals had been made, and there was a whole host of artists who had been basically brought on board with the view that your music is going to be in the film, but it wasn't going to be the standard music playing in the background or playing in a car. So it was then a matter of breaking down the elements from the multi-tracks, and I remember Nelly having several discussions with certain managers saying, you know, the record company will not release your multi-tracks, which means that all we've got is your stereo mix, and we can't use it in that form, so it'll be, you know, severely butchered. But if you would kindly send us the multi-tracks, then we will be able to use it much more kind of creatively.
Many of the musical gestures which served as themes were not sequences of notes that were recognisable melodies so much as they were excerpts from our source material, or they were parts of a song that we decided to use in the film which we were then able to quote from, not just musically but also textually and in terms of samples taken from the work.
There was too much to do. I mean, there's always too much to do, but on this particular occasion, because of the way we were creating it, there was a lot more to do than there would normally be.
Like, people were putting money into a pot, saying, so who's going to collapse first in Romeo and Juliet? And everyone kind of thought that it was going to be me. And it was close. There were many occasions where, through total exhaustion, I almost just like gave up the ghost. But as it turns out, during scoring, Marius did.
Well, I think it's true to say that I fell over at least once through complete exhaustion, and most of us were close to that on several occasions.
The guy had the weight of the world on his shoulders, and I think at that moment, it's like, the angels are singing, and, you know, he just falls over. You know, I can just imagine it that way.
All in a good cause.
Everybody's free.
I mean, obviously there was pressure from the record company to cast big stars, to sing Doves Cry, Everybody's Free, but in the end, we settled on this young singer from Texas called Quinton Tarver.
A whole lot of improvised scat over it too, you know?
In the script, Craig Pearce and I wrote as if sung by a young Stevie Wonder. So we went out looking for the young Stevie Wonder, and we found him. The only thing was he really sounded much more like Aretha Franklin.
Just sing it to me.
Brother and sister together will make it through. Yeah. Someday a spirit will take you and guide you there. I know you've been hurting, but I've been waiting to be there for you. And I'll be there just helping you out whenever I can. Everybody's free. Yeah, everybody's free. Oh, yeah, yeah. Oh, to feel good.
From the very beginning, you have musical ideas, some of which are actually written in the script. And then you go through the journey of making the film. And you've had music that you've been very passionate about for a very long time. But there finally comes a moment when you've got to actually commit to what are those musical ideas going to be. And there was a moment, for example, when I had so much of the music in place, but I had a missing cue. And, you know, there was this sort of cardboard box in which Laura or Karen or Anton had been sending me as many musical ideas based on the briefings I'd been giving that I would go through. So I remember going up at Jill Bilcock's house and where we were editing and playing through all these tracks. And I think take number 2, I just put it in. It was one of those moments, goes, "Ooh, angel," you know, and you go, that's the one.
Baz he's very clever with this sort of thing, and there's not one of those song cues throughout Romeo and Juliet which isn't very precisely in some way commentating on or illuminating the text which it's reacting with and the moment of the story into which it's placed.
And there she shall at Friar Lawrence's cell be shrived and married.
John. Nobody there, please. Everybody out of the corner. Completely. Get inside the fish plane. Get inside. Que se metan dentro de la tienda. Inside the tent. Inside.
Después de que vosotros estéis felices. Cambio.
Disobedient wretch!
Bless her. You are to blame, my lord, to rate her so.
I think if you actually touched me, I'd throw you down the stairs.
Well, no, but you could, because I would touch you. I mean,
I
no,
doubt-
Paul, I would.
You would?
Yes, I would, because this is my baby.
If it's
I
going to
mean-
be a fight, then because if you
Because
do that,
I know what you're like when you're crazy. You
I know, but you're the nurse and I'm the boss.
Doesn't
So-
matter.
All right, so if that's the
I've
case,
been
I'm
here
gonna
a
have to
long
deal,
time.
and I have to deal with you physically. If
You
you
know,
do that.
do you think you've ever done something before, actually interjected at this level?
It's okay with me, but I'll have to deal with it.
But do you think you have?
Well, I sort of get the feeling that he's a guy who always is going into rages. You know, it's one of the ways.
It's just
tropes.
Yeah, well, I just think, no, I think you're right, Miriam. I'm just saying that I think it is an extraordinary moment where if you go, you know, you are to blame too. I mean,
Well,
he's a
if
really...
it's easier not to touch.
You can, I just have to, I have to deal
Oh, no,
deal
I
with
But I
it.
mean, I feel that I have to sort of
Do it.
interpose.
Let's try it.
because
Let's try it again. Let's try it again, see what happens up.
Miriam, do the same thing, but try the other side for me this time.
Okay.
Oh, and just go
Hang
from...
thee, young baggage, disobedient wretch!
High-five, were you mad?
Well, and try, just hold the positions, hang the young baggage, action. Go again.
Hang thee, young baggage, disobedient wretch!
Nurse.
God in heaven, bless her. You are to blame, my lord, to rate her so.
Peace, you mumbling fool! Well, then it becomes a fight, that's not good. It becomes a real fight.
No, but
if she's
you-
going to be, you know...
I'm not
I know, but-
even, I don't exist for you. you know.
Well, are you?
You do if you're coming in like that. You sure do. Nobody could ignore that.
If you were there, though, let's just do it again.
It's
If you're
good. It's
there,
okay. I mean, I just want to see.
Miriam, if you're there, Martin.
Sir.
I know where.
Starve, die in the streets. Trust to it. They think you are not bit forsworn. Right. Then.
Boom, 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 boom. Now, Paul, just come back for a moment. Just one thing. I've got a master from this side to do exactly what you're doing, but play
So
yourself.
am I fighting against him this whole time?
You will.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things that when we actually get rocking, you know, you'll feel it and he'll have to. You know. But I mean, I don't know. There's a choice here that you can play like Defiance, or you can play like Sacrifice. You know, do what you want with me. I don't care. But it will come out from it.
Well, if I fall and I'm struggling, so.
Yeah.
I see it. There's one problem. I threw you down before. I don't want to do the same thing again. I think.
Her down too. So this.
I'm throwing everybody down.
Yeah.
I just think, you know what, if I may say, a suggestion, it might be better if you stood up to me in some manner, because you've done that already. And I'd rather it not be something where it becomes another physical. If I'm holding you like that.
You're fighting before, which was.
No, I threw her down before.
I know.
You think I didn't throw her down again?
Well, what I was thinking was, well, not to throw down, but the action against you was, I defy you, and you got thrown, like just thrown off like a. That if he is dealing with you like this, if you become weight yourself, which is to complete. I mean, your other action is to completely defy him, which is, I'm now no longer here. Because before you were angry, and he. I mean, as you've said, Paul, you hit her and bang. It's like, don't try and match me on that level. And
Right.
you have to see some progression. And I'm just thinking about where you end up in the next scene, which is you have actually passed the point of caring.
But
You know?
I think that's after my mom has turned her back on me as well. I mean, I'm not done yet. I don't know what's going to happen.
Baz, if she becomes weight, then that's Aikido. It takes away from what I'm doing, because I'll have to deal with that, and then it doesn't make. If she's still there.
And then I think she's very present here, and then he leaves, and then my mom leaves, and I see that nobody can deal with me, and then the nurse goes away, you know. So, but with this, yeah, there are a couple of choices. I could be defiant, or I could be not there, or I could be struggling, or, you know, there's lots of different things I could do. And I mean, it depends. Do you want to see me?
I don't want a
public?
physical
Do you want me
struggle
to
here, I
fetal
honestly don't.
position on the floor at the end?
He does anything to look forward.
No, I do everything.
Look back.
I mean, step fast.
Bouncing back. All right. Come on.
Naked lady bending over.
I feel wind.
Pictures up!
Yeah.
Pasa, filmar!
That's the way to go back.
Here's my fiddlestick! Here's what shall make you damn Jones consort!
Either withdraw to some private place or reason coldly of your grievances. Or else depart, here all eyes gaze on us.
Men's eyes are made to look and let them gaze. I will not budge for no man's pleasure eye.
Peace be with you, sir. Here comes my man. Romeo! The love I bear thee can afford no better term than this. Thou art a villain.
Tybalt, the reason that I have to love thee doth much excuse the appertaining rage in such a beauty. Nor am I none. Therefore farewell. See thou knowest me not.
And cut!
Either withdraw into some private place or reason coldly of your grievances. Or else depart, here all eyes gaze on us.
Men's eyes are made to look and let them gaze. I will not budge for no man's pleasure eye.
Peace be with you, sir. Here comes my man. Romeo, the love I multi-bandit can afford no better term than this. Thou art a villain.
Romeo will be deeper. A little bit further across.
And you want me to do much the same?
I love it, yeah. I love this. The island right, we got it. We're getting a lot more than I imagined, so that's great.
Okay, let's go again, please.
And Brent, you can have a few more comments. The things that look great, the guy jumping.
Move! Turn over! We are rolling.
So, eyeline check from Mercutio.
That's it there.
Got it, ready, and thank you, Martin.
And action! Action!
And I'll make bitches because I'm looking here nothing but this boy. Here's my bonus thing. Here's that something make you dance. Shoes, get swords. Either with swords in some private place or grievances. Or else depart here all eyes gaze on us. Men guys are make to look and let them gaze. I will not budge for no man's pleasure I.
Cut! I just want to hold it. Let's have a look.
Oh boy, Alex. Thanks, Alex. Oh,
The elevator is a small room, 6 foot by 4. Our real difficulty was moving the camera around in a circular fashion as Baz wanted us to. It wouldn't fit inside the room, so we had to devise a mechanical means by which we could move the camera outside the room. It's great credit to the performers that they were able to perform with this noisy physical distraction happening right alongside them.
Action! Just do me. Transition.
This is the climactic scene inside the cathedral. The interesting part here is that I had the biggest lighting crew I think I had on the film, but their job was to ignite and snuff out the candles in between scenes. The reason for this was the smoke from the candles would have really interfered with the photography. The other problem with the scene was, of course, convincing the audience that it's lit by both the candles and the neon lights. In fact, it wasn't. The people are lit by lights just outside the scene, and the architecture is lit by an overall soft light inside the cathedral.
Little moment to find Juliet in that
Yep.
hole there, and the game we're going to play. So we'll go around and look at that.
Yep.
But I also should get Mr. Romeo in because it will also relate to what he's doing. But I
Right.
think this shot we have to do without Romeo.
Yeah, we're
Just 'cause
tight
technically
enough
we
to
are.
get it.
Yeah.
This scene with the fish tank was exceedingly difficult to light because of the glass surface of the tank and the water. I think I succeeded by putting fluorescent tubes taped to the actual fish tank. The ambient or reflected light from these is what is actually lighting the scene. The tubes are just taped outside the camera view. Now, moving the camera across the back of the tank created a wonderful effect.
Push through,
A trick that didn't diminish the drama. It actually enhanced it immensely.
Madam! And cut. Cut. Pretty good. But much faster now. Okay, on everyone's count. Very good. Let's go again. Print that.
Banishment.
Go there.
This is a story about lighting a scene with one light. The 10K, you can see, is shining through some coloured gels, falling on a window with a crucifix pattern, surrounded by diffusing material that is sending soft light through the scene. Special effects are putting water on the glass to produce a sort of tear-like effect with the light.
Let's see. Banish. Affliction is enamored of thy parts, and thou art wedded to calamity.
Cut. Hold. Print.
What I've told you is a lie. My gaffer is using additional strobe lights to produce the lightning effect you can see on the scene. This is an example of film economics. Normally you'd move the wall back, it'd take you an hour. We decided to cut a hole, it took us 5 minutes, and we got directly on with the job.
Of young Paris face and find delight with there, the beauty's pen. This precious
But be certain it is your last shot.
To beautify him only lacks a cover. So shall you share all that he doth possess by having him making yourself no less.
If you just realize that all that matters in the end is your body of work, you can become happy. And the best thing about it is just the opportunity of working on all these terrific, movies with terrific actors. It's exciting. I thought to myself when I heard of this project, why do another Romeo and Juliet? Why it's been done well before? What's the purpose in doing it now? And as soon as I met Baz and he told me the themes, that he wanted to bring into it, I really felt like, wow, this is an important sort of movie to do, and it needed that change. It needed this new sort of boost to it. Shakespeare is really tricky because it's not like you can go in there and improvise all the time, and if you don't feel like saying a line, ask if you can cut it out. I mean, everything that Shakespeare wrote is exact, but once you really get into the character and once you realize how human he really was, you sort of get lost and you almost forget for a little while that it's actually Shakespeare. You're so involved in the story. He has a lot of emotional places that he goes through, and that was a little bit draining at times. They're going to definitely get a way of seeing Shakespeare's work done that has never been done before. I mean, just off the top of my head, they're going to see drag queens, wild, tripped out acid scenes, aquatic stuff going on, futuristic cars, a lot of gunplay, and a lot of high-powered emotion. It combines so many things, and it's so powerful, and it just doesn't let up. I want to get to a place where I'm just known as a good actor who takes good choices, and I hope that I will get other people around me that want to do the same thing. In 10 years, I hope that I'm still maintaining a good stride.
My job is to make sure that Baz gets what he wants in front of the camera. Baz started talking about Miami as being a possible backdrop, just because at that time in the paper, it was sort of a land far, far away where everybody was Latino and hot-blooded, and it seemed a very sort of religious environment, and it very much, he felt, for Americans, symbolised a land far, far away. We couldn't shoot there, and as a result, we kind of went around the world looking for an alternative location and ended up in Mexico, which I think was the perfect place to do it. We were just living just around the corner from a gas station, and it became apparent that this gas station was a bit like the town square, that there would be people crossing each other. So Baz and Craig started to talk about that possibly being the centre for where these two rival gangs meet, rather than a town square, because that's what it is in the original play. And I thought it was a great metaphor because it immediately put you in the made you clear that we were in the 20th century. Because it's so expensive to make movies and there's such a big crew to photograph something, that if on the day they decide, oh, the crucial thing is to see a close-up of this tiny little coin, it's a very expensive mistake when you've got hundreds of thousands of dollars or pounds of people standing around and your coin isn't up to scratch for the close-up. A long time ago, we were in Miami and we were in a nightclub in Miami, and Baz went to the bathroom, and there was a fish tank that divided the girls' and boys' bathrooms. And he thought, wouldn't that be amazing if Romeo and Juliet saw themselves through that particular thing? Then he became obsessed with water as a theme, a kind of a linking, kind of sensual theme in the movie. So there's lots of shots of water, people putting water on their faces and etc. It's a set. It was built, the swimming pool was a poured concrete shell on the stage. We just made facades that bordered it on two sides. And then we mixed it with a location. The more detailed the world is, the more consistent it is, the more you've worked out every single element, the more believable to the audience it is, however invisible it is.
It hit us, you know, what kind of story was this? Well, Romeo and Juliet was a Western. We wanted to knock Shakespeare off his pedestal and put him, you know, back where he belonged, which was on a billboard in Times Square and, you know, on the bedroom walls of adolescents all around the world. The trouble is, he writes in this obscure language called Elizabethan, and 90% of the world can't understand it.
What art thou drawn among these heartless hinds?
We thought that the way to help people was to present these very recognisable characters in the modern world. In looking at the world, we said, okay, well, these are the rich kids of this world. They've got money, they've got cars. What do? They probably drive around in cars, you know, slinging off at each other, biting the thumb at each other, you know, armed to the teeth. A lot of the choices Baz made in shooting that scene are sort of techniques that we've seen in Westerns, you know, like the slow-mo, fast tracking shots, crash zoom. The music is sort of reminiscent of a Sergio Leone, you know, type Western. Tybalt, when he's presented, you know, you get the image of a big bad gunslinger. So it says to the audience, even if they can't quite tune their ear into the Shakespearean dialogue at that early stage, they're going, okay, he's a really scary guy and he's really good with a gun. Everyone's scared of him. I understand who he is. He's not this sort of fop with a big feather in his hat, you know, waving a sort of a toothpick around, you know. They just sort of understand his function in the world and in the story.
She's very down to earth. She's very bright. She's very perceptive. And she knows what's up. She's been sheltered because of her parents and her title that she has, and it's sort of like she's locked in a tower a bit. But she has a body nurse who I think has taught her a few tricks along the way, and I think she's lonely. She doesn't have many friends, and so when she meets Romeo, it's just so exciting and wonderful. It's like a breath of fresh air. Everybody shares the same emotions, and we all go through similar struggles in life, and we go through the same phases, and that never changes. So we can keep telling the same stories over and over again, and we do, because we need to keep hearing them. Well, the first scene we did was the morning after scene, after we just made love, and so there we were, shirtless. You know, it was a way to break the ice. Leo knew when to loosen everybody up and make fun of ourselves and not have it be taken too seriously, which is really important. It keeps everybody's stamina up. He's one of the most interesting people I think I'll ever meet. He's really bright, so funny. Like, there would be so many moments where on the set I'd be literally hunched over and in pain because I was laughing so hard. It was so wonderful to play being in love, and it just sometimes I remember doing the balcony scene, just having to reach that point where you're just so infatuated and excited, and I would immediately feel very high after that. So that was a trip. That was great. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, I mean, the death scenes were really hard to face.
We spent a lot of time in the computer. You know, we'd take a photo of the actresses and then I'd design something on paper and then we'd map that into the person on the thing, and then we'd map the person or the people into the background so that Baz could see how they would look in that context. You need to support the words with the visuals for this piece because we're trying to get, you know, the meaning of Shakespeare out that doesn't necessarily only have to follow the words. So think of ways how we can, you know, we can kind of show the words with what you see. I looked into the script mostly and got clues from what they said, and he calls her a bright angel and they call him a prince, and so it just seemed logical that that's what they could be. You can give people a broad silhouette and then at some point their subconscious is going to focus in on the little details which fill out the story. So you don't have to explain everything. There's little things you can see that they wear and the way they wear something, and if they have a button missing, or, you know, it tells a story about the person that doesn't have to be explained. I knew there'd be a lot of guns in the movie, and I knew that we'd have to make them, you know, rapiers or, you know, swords, you know, put up your swords, so we had to make them like brand names. Of course, I knew nothing about guns. So we bought hundreds of gun magazines which explained what you could do and what you couldn't do, you know, how a gun could look and couldn't look for it to be able to function properly. And then I was just allowed to kind of go off on flights of fancy, which, you know, some of them Baz thought were hilarious and some of them he thought were good, and so we just made them.
I wouldn't think for a shootout you'd get a choreographer to give him flamenco lessons. If I hadn't worked with him at all, it would have been a different picture. But as soon as you see him, he's quite stylized and you get a sense of his character straight away. Just the way he holds his body, very much flamenco style, kind of like a matador with a couple of guns. They're quite heavy, so that's why you could only maybe rehearse for 2 hours each go. But I guess it's kind of like, you know, if John was like walking in and like going like that, it's not quite as strong as, you know, like that wasn't my best one. But you know what I mean? I guess there is a certain style that you can get to it, which will really embellish what he's doing, particularly as a character as well. Don't you agree?
Tybalt is the essence of the play. He's the one that makes the whole thing spin around him because it's his rage and his hurt and his anger that really propelled the rest of the movie into the final third act. Because of his misunderstanding of things and his selfishness, he hurts Mercutio. He kills him, trying to kill Romeo. Well, the thing is, you know, he's one of these guys that you meet like in clubs or you meet in New York City, who's like, you know, he thinks he's good looking. He knows how to fight. He loves attention, and he loves to be the center of attention. And when that's threatened by anything, then they're like, you know. They're like bombs, time bombs waiting to happen. That's what he's like. He's just waiting to like start a fight. The reason that Tybalt's a great fighter is because he went to in the script, I mean, as Shakespeare wrote it, he went to the Spanish school of fencing and fighting. And then what Baz has done, the director, is that he's correlated the gunplay with the sword play of the time and created the same codes as if this was a sword-carrying society. Now it's a gun-carrying society. So you have still the codes of you can't shoot somebody in the back. if you do a duel, it's with one bullet, one round in the gun, and you just can't shoot somebody for no reason. You have to be provoked. I guess what makes Romeo and Juliet popular is regardless of where you are in your life, there was a point in your life where you believed that there is such a thing as pure love and that you make any sacrifice for this love, and we all want to believe that even if we've lost that kind of innocence.
When we zoom in on Tybalt's teeth saying sin. The idea originally was that it was going to crash zoom right in on his face, and it never was quite successful enough, so we thought, well, let's just shoot the teeth and let's write this on it. So we just shot that ourselves in the editing room. I just went down the local video shop and got out all the spaghetti westerns and stole the music off it and chopped it up and put it on the cart to create, because we wanted it to be like that, a spaghetti western. The reason we did the shot of some cans being shot, that was done because suddenly in America they said they never shoot it. We never see a bullet hit anything. So we thought, oh, we're going to shoot a can and a sign and show that the bullets went somewhere. There he goes out into the street, which unfortunately was the real street. And nobody knew and thought he was for real with the gun. It is a much slower scene because love is not fast. It is a slow and luxurious emotion that everybody likes to enjoy.
Let them find me here. My life were better ended by their hate than death broken.
This is the time to go with them and enjoy the beauty of the language and understand some of those words for the first time.